as governments consider new construction, so for example, if you're building a new apartment building, you should make sure that a percentage of the parking spots that are allocated have EV chargers in them.
Tim, welcome to the EVs 2023 live podcast from Berlin. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. How was your trip over from New York area?
Uneventful, which
Those are the best kind of trips.
Absolutely.
So you work for the GfK, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And for people at home who might not know who that is, can you give a little update on yourself and the organization in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So GfK, which is an NIQ company now, and GfK is a large-scale market research company with global capabilities. And my focus is on broad-based consumer trends, and my interest really is around sustainability and a few categories, including the automotive industry.
Lovely. So, it goes without saying the past 5 years have completely changed when it comes to the world of EVs, at least on the manufacturing sense. It used to be very hard to get hold of anything, and now it seems every major car maker is actually putting something forward that's electrified. But I guess the question I'd put to you is, are people responding? Do people want electric cars?
Yeah, absolutely. At a baseline level, we're seeing very strong demand for electric vehicles. I think really one of the next steps for the industry is to really translate the interest, the demand, the excitement that consumers have into actual purchase decisions.
What's stopping the purchase decisions at the minute?
Yeah, it's a mix of both real barriers and also perceived barriers. So there are certainly some infrastructure issues that governments and automotive manufacturers have to contend with. One of the biggest things is just building a charging network so that people can feel comfortable and they can reduce their range anxiety. And then there's some of the perceived barriers as well, which is where the consumer perspective and a lot of our research comes into play. We see that this idea of range anxiety is stubbornly high. We see that consumers sometimes have a misrepresentation in their mind of what an EV actually is. For example, about a third of all global consumers will tell us that EVs are too costly to maintain. But that's generally a falsehood because EVs are less complicated and they're cheaper to maintain generally than a traditional combustion engine.
Where do those misconceptions come from?
I think it's just historically baked into, unfortunately, the sustainability dialogue overall. People generally, not even related to automotive, but just generally tend to feel a little unsure. Sometimes they're a little skeptical about going green, let's say, or choosing a more sustainable option, and EV represents that. But we've seen that in other categories as well, where consumers are unsure if that product is going to be right for them and it's actually going to work as intended, and it's going to either improve their life or have some sort of other altruistic benefit associated with it.
And then kind of going back to the point you said about range anxiety, that is the thing I kind of hear most, I guess. Like a lot of new tech advances, I always do go the old-fashioned, what does my dad think route? It's VR. Will my dad use this? I don't think so. So that's my view, that it's probably not going to get like mass acceptance. And his one thing is always, I don't want an EV because it's not going to go far enough. Now, you mentioned kind of infrastructure being part of that. What needs to effectively happen to get rid of range anxiety?
Yeah, it's what's going on right now. Frankly, it is the charging network. It's also the types of chargers that will be available to people depending on your needs for charging. You might need a charger that charges your car a little longer. Let's say you're going out to eat with your family and you don't need your car charged in 20 minutes. Maybe you want to have that be a little bit longer versus, you're on your way to work and you realize that you're low on battery, so you need to stop off at a charger. So you need enough of those chargers, and you also need them within places where people can actually find them.
And how do we ensure that it doesn't become a siloed shop? So at least in the UK, there's no access to lots of people for Tesla chargers because they've effectively created their own network.
Yeah.
How do we avoid that happening? Is that just purely governmental and regulatory, or are there other ways to ensure that there's access for everyone, no matter what kind of type of car they're driving?
Yeah, when it comes to sustainability, these are big problems. Climate change is a big problem. Trying to figure out EV charging networks is a big problem. So big problems require big solutions, and generally a lot of cooperation. Right, cooperation between governments, between companies, and also from people themselves. So as it relates to the charging network, you need people. Basically, you need those groups to come together and figure out what is going to be a workable solution, so you can move what is sort of a sort of the early adopter model right now more into the early majority.
And then how do we get from early adopters into a majority? What are the next steps that we're going to where EVs become the de facto method? So obviously I know there's lots of EU countries are stopping selling petrol cars by 2030, 2025, depending on the nation. But how do we ensure that more people get in electric cars?
Yeah, I do think that those government mandates are really important. I also think that as governments consider new construction, so for example, if you're building a new apartment building, you should make sure that a percentage of the parking spots that are allocated have EV chargers in them. I think you mentioned to circle back to the idea of standardization. Mm-hmm. That's really important. So yeah, Tesla has the largest network, and we do see in the US, for example, certain automotive manufacturers adapting to that network. So having standardization will be really important, because obviously one of the most frustrating things would be to go up to a charger and you're unable to charge your car.
And then how do you get those people around the table? These are massive companies with their own agendas. How do you ensure that they actually work together?
Yeah, and that's the issue with sustainability generally is in order for progress to really be made on a large scale, you do need to break down some of those barriers, and those conversations need to happen. Government is going to be a really key facet of that. So in terms of mandates, but also are there ways to bring those people all together at a table to talk about these issues and make sure that that people have what they need in order to grow the market?
So if you're going to put your predicting wizard's hat on and you think of 5, 10, 15 years in the future, what's our relationship going to be like with electric vehicles?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot stronger than it is today. The interest is certainly there. The demand is there. And a lot is being done to increase the infrastructure, reduce prices, right? So as technology advances, of course, we see all those sort of issues start to fall away. So as long as the industry and again, some of the other actors that are involved continue to work on those issues, I would definitely expect EVs to be a dominant force. It doesn't mean that other forms of alternative engines would go away. Hybrids, for example, are still very popular with certain parts of the population, especially in developed markets, and also older consumers, and also people maybe with lower income as well. So I wouldn't say we should even just focus it all on just one discussion around EV. There are other alternative forms of transportation that also have the desired impact of reducing climate change and having less of an impact on the environment.
And if you had to finally speak to my dad directly and try and convince him about EVs, what would you say?
I would say that it drives just like a regular car. It performs like a regular car. My dad, I know, doesn't like to take his car in for an oil change or maintenance, and there's less of that with EVs. So there's certainly some hurdles and barriers and some perceptions that need to change. But overall, it is definitely a viable technology for mobility.
I'm going to clip that out and send it to him, Tim. Nice. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cheers.